Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics, a podcast dedicated to exploring how things get places and the people who get them there. We'll talk with logistics and supply chain leaders about innovation, industry trends, and the future of the logistics business. Now, here's your host, Joe Lynch.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is understanding distributed order management with my friend Dan Gilmore. How's it going, Dan?
Joe, it's going great, and very glad to be back here again to speak with you today.
I'm very excited too. This is a topic that we all need to know about. And I know some people are probably rolling their eyes, going, "Oh no, order management is going to be boring." But this is the stuff that makes our e-commerce work, and not just e-commerce. It makes our business work. So you need to start understanding this stuff. This is the stuff that's making it work or not work. So stick around. Dan understands it and he'll explain it to us. So anyway, Dan, before we go any further, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Sure. This is Dan Gilmore again. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Softeon, headquartered in Reston, Virginia. And my home base is actually Dayton, Ohio area. But we're a supply chain software company, including warehouse management, warehouse execution systems, and our what we're talking about today, distributed order management, and have a broad platform of solutions that all kind of flow from those three main core anchor solutions that I just mentioned. And got myself down to Dayton many years ago, working for NCR, and got into the barcode and data collection area. And that kind of led to wireless systems, it led to warehouse management systems, and have been very focused on that for many years now.
Yeah, and you've been in a lot of the warehouse management companies, and so you've seen the way it's worked. And I know you just recently, well, I should say recently, in the last few years, joined Softeon. What did you see when you joined Softeon? What was the opportunity? Because I know you could have gone any number of places.
I did some consulting for Softeon before taking a spot there, and I just got to see the level of innovation and the level of concern for customer success. And I wish I could say the software industry was always focused on that, but the reality of it is not. So, there's what I think some help, the areas where they needed some help were things I was good at. And I was very pleased to join a company that had the kind of attitude and solution set that the Softeon did. So it's worked out well.
Yep. And I know there's a lot of restrictions on the way we talk about it, but you guys did real well in the Gartner survey. I know you shared some of that with me. I won't talk about it anymore because I'm afraid I'll step on a landmine.
Yeah, you just got to be a little sensitive. But the Gartner does a thing called the Magic Quadrant, well known, and then another thing called the Critical Capabilities Report for WMS, which looks at nothing but WMS functionality across a variety of attributes. And for warehouses of level 3, 4, 5 complexity on their scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being simple and 5 being heavily complex and automated. We were second or third in each of those categories, which we could have lobbied for a slightly higher, not much higher possible, but slightly higher position. But we're very pleased with how we score there, and certainly a lot of companies look at the Gartner material before they decide who they'd like to invite for a selection opportunity, and so that's very helpful for us.
Well, I think also when you talk about buying software, any sort of software, but especially warehouse management or transportation management software, any of that, you don't buy it every year. So you don't always have the latest and greatest information on what's out there. But on top of that, you probably don't have a team that's purchased it lately either.
Yeah, and we see all kinds of, but you're right. I mean, people hold on to these applications for 7, 10, sometimes even almost forever. There's still some very old systems, 1990s era systems that are out there in some cases. But yeah, I mean, if you're not looking at, you're not doing this for a job or whatever, you got your own work to concerned about. So when people, unless they've just come in from another company that did a selection recently or something like that, it's kind of a educational process in terms of kind of reorienting yourself to what's going on with the WMS technology, or DOM in this case, a little newer solution than WMS. It takes a little while to get up to speed, but there's lots of materials out there that can help you do that, and lots of consultants that can help you as well.
Right. And one of the things, actually, we had this conversation yesterday. I was wondering, when was the first warehouse management system. And you had actually Googled it, I think. What was the first warehouse management system that was first used?
Yeah, no, I didn't Google it. I've known that for a long time. But generally believed to be,
See, you have been doing this a while.
yeah, generally believed to be in 1975 when a company called Logisticon, that's long gone, but implemented a WMS, which basically is an inventory. What defines a WMS versus an inventory management software is it does the inventory management tracking, but it uses mobile wireless terminals, commonly called RF, and pervasive use of barcode scanning to confirm transactions and ensure accuracy and those kind of things. So they would believe that a J.C. Penney warehouse not long after that, a company called Catalyst, which is still around in some form, different name, implemented another WMS in Del Monte Food. So there's a little bit of competing claims there. But anyway, it's 1975, so we're coming up on a 50-year anniversary of WMS in just a few years.
Yeah, and this has come up before when we talked about transportation management system, but it applies also to warehouse management system, is that the most sophisticated companies, the ones that had the most complicated problems, they're the ones who implemented WMS first, way back in the 70s, and that was probably the early ones, but I'm sure in the 80s, 90s, they implemented all these warehouse management systems. And if you are, one of those big companies like a Del Monte or J.C. Penney, you have millions and millions of transactions that you've done. And that becomes the challenge. You've also probably added on, done some custom integrations along the way. And then when somebody says, hey, it's time to buy a new software, or at least look at it, you're like, God almighty, when did we do that last?
Yeah, there's no question. And, all the systems well through the 90s, even into the 2000s, were heavily customized systems. And that fortunately has changed for us. Almost all of our opportunities are out of the box, or just about out of the box, solutions and whatever. But there's still a lot. It's one of the barriers. There's still a lot of customers that have huge customization. Companies that have huge customizations. They've taken over the software from a firm that went out of business or got sold or bought off or whatever. And that still represents a decent sized part of the market is the companies that are looking to finally get off these legacy systems they've had for 15, 20 years.
And sometimes, Dan, am I wrong to say this? They don't even have a choice because they might have been on a legacy system. And when that company got bought, the new company said, we're going to migrate you to our new system. And that's usually a good time to say, should I consider looking around before I let myself go through this, what's going to be a very difficult transition?
Yeah, absolutely. That is very common. I think that is a trigger when you've got an upgrade that is basically the same as a brand new project. That certainly causes some people often to go out and start surveying the market to see whether what they've got is really what they want to have going forward.
Yeah, if I'm gonna move my millions of transactions, I want to make sure I'm moving it to somebody that I want. So maybe not necessarily just the company that bought me, or bought my old software provider. So anyway, let's switch gears. I wanted to talk to you today, and by the way, I have interviewed Dan before. What I'll do is I'll put a link to those interviews in the show notes. And Dan's always the ones who's explaining these things, and I'm always the one asking the dumb questions. So I want to talk a little bit about this. What is a distributed order management, and compare that to what did we have before that? So take us through the traditional, and then why we're using distributed order management in some situations now.
Sure, and I think at the very beginning you said something about this is something people need to know about. I co-authored an article in CSCMP's Supply Chain Quarterly publication. I think it was 2021, and the title was something to the effect of the most important software category you probably haven't heard of. And that's really how I view kind of DOM. It really is a Swiss Army knife of different capabilities that deeply connected to trends in how we're distributing products and e-commerce and things like that. So I'm gonna first just highlight. There's many different things that DOM can do. I'm just going to start with what I think is actually the most important one. Which is that it enables companies to very precisely define and then dynamically execute their business strategies and their fulfillment strategies, and to be able to do that over time. Adapt that over time. There's really nothing like this in the supply chain software market, as far as I know, and I've been covering this industry a lot of different ways for many years. You can define
Oh yeah, you're the publisher of that. What is this? Supply chain.
Watch and Digest. Yeah.
Yes, which is one
Yeah.
of the best.
Yeah. So
I know you still contribute to it. So
I still got a weekly column. Yeah. So it allows you to say, this is what I want to do in an English language like approach to define how you want the business to work, and not coding, not complex workflow management or whatever. It's using what's called a dynamic rules engine, and then the ability to do this. I sometimes when we do demos or whatever, and people will say, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" And my technical people sometimes look a little askance at me when I say this, but maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not too much. Which is, I say, if you can define it in English what you want to happen, we can make it work in the DOM. And so in this era of both trying to adopt strategies in rapidly evolving times and needing to adapt those over time, the ability to do that is just effectively is just an incredible competitive advantage, and it gets you from idea to action much more rapidly than the way traditional software has worked. And so I didn't know much about DOM, not that many years ago. And as I got to know it, I said, this is just really, really different. I don't know if every company does it the same, but I think there's similar among the leaders, certainly some similarities. But the way we do it is just that flexibility to say, this is how I want the business rules to work. And to be able to do that without programmers, people can go in and just create and configure rules.
yeah, and I think this is the way laymen like myself want to work. Is I want to be able to say, here's what's going on in my business, and you guys to be able to translate it into the software. But give me an example how this might serve somebody.
Well, I mean, and we'll get into this later in the conversation, but just as an easy example, if an order comes in, how should that order be routed to which node in my network, whether my own node or a third party node or a vendor drop ship or whatever it happens to be? How do I pick the best one that's going to meet customer service requirements and do so at least possible cost? And we'll go through some use cases a little bit later in the there's so many different kinds of use cases, both B2B and B2C. Well, hopefully we have enough time to go through those kind of towards the end.
I think when we had one warehouse and that warehouse supported stores, that was we had rules in place, and we didn't need dynamic anything. Now we have multiple warehouses sometimes, and we have omni-channel. So the rules that we want our business to work by have gotten a lot more complex, and we need software because otherwise we have to jump in and be in the middle of all these to make the decisions ourselves.
Yeah, you can't do that. I mean, it won't scale up, and you'll lead yourself to problems. No, there's no question about that. The networks are more complex, strategies are more complex, multiple channels of distribution. They each have their own rules and all of those kind of things. And so DOM, does that and does it in based on a number of different ways. And the starting you mentioned different warehouses. So it starts with very granular real-time visibility to inventory across an extended network. That could be my own distribution centers. That could be a third-party distribution center. That could be a vendor that is going to do shipping for me, or even potentially different dealers across your network. We've seen some examples where companies want to actually take inventory from one independent dealer and have them ship it to another independent dealer that are all under the company brand, the main company's brand. And how do you do that? What are the rules around doing that? And how do you execute that effectively? That's the kind of thing that DOM can do. And I like to kind of call it, fulfillment orchestration at the network level. So DOM doesn't get down into has to communicate to get the visibility and to deliver the instructions to the individual nodes, whether they're your own or whether they're a third party. But at the network level, across these different nodes that are available, it's going to say for each and every order, I have to decide now for this order, where am I going to source this inventory from, and what are the rules associated with making that decision? That's what DOM does. That really has not existed, until DOM came on the scene. And so, like again, this we'll go through some more, but I call it the Swiss Army knife because it's got screwdrivers, it's got pliers, it's got a knife, it's got all the different tools out there, and it's just how you want to configure those to solve your particular problem.
Yeah, it reminds me. I used to say this about implementing software is that we have to have sometimes running rules for what goes into the system, right? And then you don't hear the people you say running rules that go with software anymore because we're able to kind of put more and more into the software. But this feels like this is the running rules for the way we're going to manage our fulfillment. Take us through and talk a little bit about the history of how we got to this. What did we used to do before we had DOM, and then when did this come about?
Yeah, so it's actually, the history is kind of interesting. In the .com era, as all kinds of the term e-tailer sprung onto the scene. I'm talking in 2000 type time frame, 2001, back before the bubble crashed. You had these e-tailers who held no inventory and were brand companies of one kind or another that were relying on a supplier network to do their orders for them. Today, what we call drop shipping. I don't think that term was used at that time frame, and I was very involved back then, actually, as an analyst in part, studying the market there. So there was a couple of companies that I'm aware of. There may have been some others, but in that time frame, said, okay, how do we solve this problem? And so it was, how do we connect a diverse supplier network to be able to see inventory and to be able to route inventory based on some set of rules to the right supplier who we have at least a reasonably high level of confidence actually has the inventory to fill the product. So this was a real need in the new e-tail world. But then the .com, bubble crashed and the bubble blew up or whatever, and then DOM didn't go anywhere for a number of years. And then we had the 2008, 2009 recession and kind of pulled things back and all that. And then it was really a little bit after that, starting about 2016, 2017, where this kind of came back, and this is as e-commerce was starting to really gain some momentum here, and now it's just today's version of the e-tailer of many years before, and so now DOM has become almost essential if you were an omni-channel retailer, and a lot of the market pays most attention, both from an analyst perspective as well as from a software company strategy perspective, on that retail fulfillment market, and it is a big market. But we believe there's significant opportunities in the in outside of retail, both in direct to consumer strategies for brand companies as well as in B2B strategies in some very wild, very, very unusual. Hopefully, I have a chance to share a couple of these examples. Very creative thinking in terms of how this product might be used in a B2B context, and so. A lot going on, and we just mentioned real quickly, it's in terms of, DOM also allows you to, manage very complex order policies. So things like, what are the rules around back orders? Can you process? So we run into lots of companies, especially in the 3PL world, that want to be able to handle subscription business. Where I order something, I get these 3 things every month or whatever. How do I handle that effectively? Inventory allocation. How do I do that? Both generally and across channels. Is it firm by channel, or can I transfer allocation from one, or inventory from one channel to another? How do I handle new product introductions? And at the end of the day, what this usually has some resonance. I say you're trying to select the node for fulfillment that meets the customer commitment, or the SLA, that you have agreed to, but do that while considering network capacities and constraints, and in the end, pick the least possible cost sourcing node that meets that customer need. And it was a bit of a mouthful of saying it, but that in its core, whether it's B2B or B2C, that in the end is at the core of what a DOM does.
Yep. Now, let me ask a question, because I've heard people use the term fencing before. Do you ever hear that term, fencing?
Fencing?
Yeah. And what they meant by that was, let's just say I have 2 retailers, and I'm going to send one asks for all my stock, and I say, no, I'm not going to give that all my stock to that guy. I'm going to fence and make sure I can give some to Dan and some to Joe, so Joe doesn't hog them all and Dan has empty shelves. And I know this speaks more to retail, but when we have these omni-channel requirements, you could see where somebody said, hey, this took off selling at stores, and now my Amazon or my online isn't, I'm not capable of fulfilling anything on those. So is that part of what a DOM could do?
Oh, absolutely. And again, this is what's so key, Joe, because what you just described there is a business problem primarily. It is not a supply chain problem, if you will, or it's a derivative supply chain problem. The problem you were talking about there is, what is my strategy if I have more demand than I have inventory and capacity? What should be the rules that say how much I give each of my channel partners or some level of my channel partners, and how do I execute that? That is precisely what you can do in DOM. So if you've got an Amazon and I don't know, and of course Amazon probably doesn't like me saying this, but if you've got Amazon that's going to consume all your inventory and you want to uh, hold back on some of that, well, then your allocation to Amazon is set, and it could even be derivative of like my inventory levels go up and down, and so my allocation to Amazon is going to go up and down. And then when the order comes in, no one has to look at it, no one has to try to figure it out. That you defined already the rules, and so it's going to just dynamically execute those rules. And guess what? As that changes over time, you didn't used to do Walmart, and now you're doing Walmart in addition to Amazon or some other marketplace. Well, how do I adapt that rule very easily without coding, without ever to now encompass that new reality? I'll tell you one interesting thing. I'm going to get out of the retail world for a second, but we're working with a equipment manufacturer. May come back and talk about that a little bit, but basically they're sold out of their equipment and they have allocation by their dealers. And so when a dealer reaches, their allocation for the month and coming out of a sales and operations planning process, they try to place an order. We're going to flag that and say, you had an allocation for 50 this month, and this is big, expensive equipment. You had an allocation for 50 this month. This is your 51st order. So you can't just have it. But on the other hand, if other people are underperforming their allocation, we don't want to lose that order. We want to say, okay, we're taking it away from partner B that's only sold 10 out of their 50, and we're going to give that allocation part of it to the first one that already reached their allocation of 50. And again, all these things I'm talking about are business problems that you say you first have to define what do you want those rules to be. Once you define what you want the rules to be, to encode them in DOM through configuration is a pretty basic, simple exercise.
Yeah, Dan, when you were talking about that, it occurred to me, if I was running a business, I'd say, okay, you are responsible for the Amazon, you're responsible for our website, and you're responsible for our retail. And then I could see somebody coming back and saying, hey, so-and-so's taking too much of our inventory and there's not enough left for my channel. I could also see where at some point maybe I make less on my transactions with Amazon. So I say, I want to limit for that reason. But to your point, what if one day I'm slow in retail and I do have extra? So these would have to be a whole bunch of conversations and a whole bunch of brain power, maybe more than the average person could even compute in their head. I mean, I could see going to a whiteboard and debating it all afternoon. So,
well, there's two things. There's, but first you do a human being does have to do the strategy, right? And so first you have to come up with what the strategy and how you would like the system to work. Now, then the great news is you can, again, very easily adapt those strategies over time because we're in a tremendously dynamic world. If you're a retailer, just for example, you add 5 new stores that you want to make fulfillment points. How do I go in and say, okay, now for these orders, given these attributes and characteristics, these orders that were going to other retail stores for fulfillment are now going to the 5 new ones because they didn't exist before and they're closer to us. They're in Minneapolis and you didn't have a Minneapolis distribution center stores there or whatever. You need to be able to do that in, hours, days, not weeks and months through additional coding or whatever. And I realize I'm getting a little bit repetitive here, but that's the beauty of the thing is first off, initially setting the rules, as you said there, but something changes every day. And I can't possibly keep up with that from a coding perspective. I need to have a tool that I can flexibly do that with, using nothing but super users, not IT people, just smart super users that can understand, okay, this is how we want it to work. I'm going to go in and code that and make it work in DOM.
Yeah, I want to go through some case studies, but I want to kind of point out how this is such a real world problem. It is December 22nd. We're going to release this probably after the new year, but December 21st, yesterday, I was at Meijer, one of my favorite stores, and I was at Meijer, and it was late. It was like 10 o'clock at night. It was picked over, and Meijer never wants to be picked over, but they are, right? And then I'd sent a birthday gift to one of my daughters. It was 2 days late, and it's not still not arrived. And it hit me like, as even though we survived COVID, we still have lots of problems, and those are not related to just the logistics guys or just the manufacturers. These are complex problems that we're trying to address. So there's a good chance there's inventory for some of this stuff. It just didn't get there.
Yeah, and part of that has to do with the visibility. Some of that's a logistic stuff that are outside of anybody's, anybody can do. If the carriers just don't have the capacity, there's nothing Dom or anything can do to solve that issue. But let me just give you another kind of twist on what you said there. So was it 2001? If you remember, there were tremendous ice storms down in the Dallas, Texas area. I think it hit Houston as well. Unheard of, low temperatures and heavy ice. Well, we have had a couple of Dom customers, but one particular customer of mine had distribution points in Dallas and near Houston, maybe it was Austin or something like that, and from serving a certain segment of the market. Well, all of a sudden those facilities were down. Workers didn't come in. They didn't know no one opened up or whatever. Well, what do you do? Well, with Dom, very very quickly you're able to say, okay, for this period of time. Or until we tell you differently, we're actually going to route the orders that were going to go to Dallas or Houston or Austin, and we're going to route them to Salt Lake City or New Orleans or where and do that again in a very rapid period of time. And then when the ice storm clears and things are back to normal, you can go back to the rules that you had before that. And so that's a way that Dom can help in terms of supply chain disruption. If your supply chain is disrupted and you need to now change the logic, you don't have to go to the programmers and say, here's what I need you to code up. You go into the DOM and change the rules.
Right. By using DOM, we get that resiliency, take that brittleness out of our supply chain, give us that flexibility that we need. So and we see certain companies able to do that over and over again. I think it's becoming more of an expectation by customers is that, I've heard people who are, I heard a teenager talking about fulfillment in a way that I was like, God, I didn't even know what the word fulfillment meant when I was his age. But there's when we want that resiliency, which we lacked a little bit of during COVID, and right now we're lacking a little bit of it. We need a DOM. So take us through some case studies, Dan, because they're. I think it'll highlight the importance of why we need this.
Sure. So let me get to a spot. I've got some notes that I'm going to use. So let's take one, and this is kind of the classic, although I'm going to, again, emphasize this is by far from the only application. But, we've got one customer that's a fast-growing omni-channel retailer. They were only catalog and online until, 4 years ago, something like that. When they decided to open up a network of stores, and now I think they have upwards of 90 stores, and so they needed to be able
to... I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah. So did I say 90? Up 70 stores, I think. But they needed, now with these physical stores, they needed a new set of capabilities. They needed to do things like buy online, pick up in store. When COVID came around, to be able to do curbside picking, to be able to do fulfillment out of stores, and so with DOM. What you should be able to do is to add those capabilities to a company without having to modify the underlying, often legacy type systems that the retailer or omnichannel retailer has. And so this company was able to enable those kind of processes without doing all kinds of changes to their existing systems. They just put the DOM layer in on top and integrated with these other systems, and they were able to get up and running much more faster. And they're doing, the optimal order sourcing. Again, identifying for each and every order, what is the least cost place to source that from that's going to meet the carrier customer commitment that we've given or made. But again, this notion of capacity is a constraint. So store fulfillment operations, or if you've ever seen, are not usually the most sophisticated operations, and they have a limited capacity. So you could have a scenario, defined in the DOM that says, okay, this store can do, let's just make something up, 40 online order fulfillments a day. That's it. So even if that's now an order comes in and the least cost place and the best place to ship it from is this store, but it's reached its capacity of 40, I got to route that to a different store or back to a fulfillment center because I just don't have the capacity. And so this is where the dynamic nature of it is that
In the traditional system, you wouldn't have that capability automatically built into you have that DOM layer. You wouldn't have that wouldn't happen.
yeah, and you can take that even further, right? Because you could say, all right, that 40 a day, that's kind of a generic capacity. But I could, in this particular case, they're not. But I could actually tie that to who showed up today. So I got the capacity I have to get orders out of a retail store or a distribution center, frankly. But let's just take a retail store for example. Is dependent on how many employees I have working today. If I only have a bare threshold that all have to busy taking care of customers, I may have little to no capacity today. So that's something that can be factored in. And this is something that we are doing, which is if their capacity is 40 and halfway or 3/4 of the way through the day, they've only done 8 of the 40 orders that we've sent, we're actually going to take some of those orders because it looks like the store's not going to get it done. So we can automate seamlessly to the retailer. They wouldn't, this individual store, they wouldn't even know. We're going to take some of those, at noon or whatever, or 2:00 in the afternoon. We're going to take some of those orders that we're supposed to go to this store, move them to a different place because it doesn't look like this store that they went to is on top of their game today for whatever reason. And that all just happens automatically based on the rule set.
Right. And in the past, you would have to have somebody looking through those and then make that decision. But who knows if they're making the right decision, right? It never could work.
It wouldn't get done. Is what the bottom. There's not enough manpower to do that, on a manual type basis across whatever number of stores. So it just wouldn't happen. And one interesting thing on this particular case study, I'll just note also is that we're also doing what we call inventory balancing. So as goods are ordered and come in, say the ports of LA or Long Beach or whatever that happens to be, where should that inventory that's been on a boat for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it's been, when we ordered it, we got some advanced ship notices using a vendor portal to say it's what's going to show up. And so when it arrives, now we have more information than we did a month ago when we placed the order in terms of what DC, maybe even which store should receive what amounts of that inventory. And so we're going to factor in, current on hand inventory, what the forecast is, any promotions that are going on. It's kind of like reverse DOM. It's on optimizing the inbound side to say, okay, given that I've just received these goods ordered weeks and months ago, where should they be shipped to from the port today that's going to meet those kind of attributes that I just mentioned. So this is very cool.
Yeah, we absolutely positively need it. And we do know that there's stores. I think we all know about Target. Target does a lot of their fulfillment from their stores, but not all of it. And they would have to have some sort of rules. So they probably have some sort of DOM that says we can do these 10 orders, but not the 11th through the 20th today on this particular product.
Yeah, and that's exactly how that. I've read some things about Target. I think that's very accurate in terms of how they operate.
And,
yes.
And by the way, there's such a rarity in that there's a huge brand. Walmart can do it, Target can do it, but it's for most companies they're not going to have they're going to have 1 or 2 locations in your metropolitan area. So we have to recognize that.
So let me just say, you got time for one more point here on this. In terms of omnichannel, I like to think of what I to the best of my knowledge, I invented this concept of there's 3 different kind of main entities, POIs or points of interaction. This is where I'm actually placing an order from. That's a website. That's walking into a store. That's a kiosk. That's your phone. That's something. Who knows what something else? Your television pretty soon, right? So you have all kinds of points of interaction. You have different points of distribution, PODs. You have your own facilities. You have stores. You have partner vendor facilities. You have original equipment manufacturer facilities, whatever it happens to be. And then I've got increasingly important, of course, in omnichannel is points of return or PORs. And what I need to be able to do is to enable all of the different combinations that make sense there in terms of how do I connect the different points of interaction with the different points of fulfillment, and then as a reverse logistics perspective, the points of return. And again, that's a very useful framework to think about. And this is what DOM can allow you to do, because maybe I don't want to enable every point of fulfillment for every point of interaction for whatever reason. Okay. And then where do I want products to be returned by? And is that going to change over time? I'm going to start with one strategy. It's working or not working. It's not every store, but just some stores, whatever it happens to be. So connecting and integrating the flows between points of interaction, points of fulfillment, and points of return is one of the great benefits that DOM can bring.
Yeah, and by the way, that is the Rubik's cube for humans to figure out. You have to go come up with a strategy and say we're going to enter it in the system, and when we don't have to touch it every single day and make those hundreds, if not thousands, of individual decisions across the supply chain.
So, are you ready for another case study?
Yeah, let me just throw one other thing out there before we get into that. So we've heard, and it seems like it's moving slower than we wanted. Wall Street Journal wrote about Amazon opening department stores. I'm doing air quotes because I think that's kind of a insult to what we know Amazon does. But one of the things I'm pretty sure that they're going to sell their private label stuff. Of course, we all know that. It's going to be real high tech in the checkout, but a big part of that strategy is just what you mentioned, the point of returns, because returns is 30% of e-commerce. So it's a huge deal, and we've all done return stuff. But another thing that we see, Goodwill and all these charities say, get an incredible amount of stuff that people said, I'm not going to return. I'm just going to go take it to Goodwill and get rid of it. So I love what you said. Point of interactions, that's where we buy it. Point of distribution or fulfillment, and then points of return. This is the Rubik's Cube that we can't figure out on our own. We need the techies to help us.
Well, and it's a constantly evolving. It's as if it's a constantly evolving Rubik's cube. So what side is what color today changes tomorrow.
Oh yeah, and points of interaction.
I got to read. Those people that can do it in like 20 seconds or whatever. That's that's a good analogy for what Dom does. Dom is the Rubik's cube genius that can solve the problem in a short period of time. Dom does it dynamically. And that's something that's very valuable for companies.
Yeah, and again, this is if we don't have this, if we say we're going to do omni-channel and we don't have this, we are in trouble, because it is the things that it's not just a matter of I ship to homes and I ship to retailers. It's the back and forth, the give and take every day, where the retailer didn't need all this. I'm going to move some of it over to e-commerce. Too hard. Anyway, take us through another case study.
Sure. And I'll just mention real quick, in terms of, we think of omnichannel retail, and that's what we've been talking about for the last number of minutes here. But, obviously there's a lot of action going on in consumer goods companies and brand companies that may or may not have some kind of online channel, but are looking for new kinds of strategies. So we're increasingly talking to, again, brand type companies, apparel companies, whatever hard goods companies that, are looking to employ some kind of, sell anywhere, ship anywhere type of strategy. That anywhere in my network, I ought to be able to know that the inventory is there and then be able to use it, allocate it, and ship it to meet customer orders. So I'm going to use that, and that's what Dom does again. So I'm going to use that as a general statement. Then I'll talk about one consumer goods company, not quite as sophisticated as that, but they're using not only our DOMs. We actually do have a traditional distributed order management system, or inventory order management system, OMS. So they actually have both the DOM and pieces of our OMS to deploy what they call an enterprise order management system. But one of their big challenges is vendor drop ship. So they have, I believe, something like 50 different vendors that they do. They route orders from themselves. They don't hold the inventory. They route the orders to the appropriate dropship vendor. Within the process is facilitated by DOM to do they do the pick and pack and ship, but in terms of confirming the transaction and updating the status and all of that stuff. So, and what's kind of interesting there is sometimes they run into what I call double drop ship, where they have some SKUs that they always drop ship from a vendor, but sometimes they may get an order for a retail. This is, if I didn't say so, it's a consumer packaged goods company. I hope I did. They get an order from a retailer, and they actually are out of the inventory. They would normally ship it themselves, not through the vendor. But in this particular case, they're out of that inventory, so they'll drop ship it again to the original, the product manufacturer, and so you get this kind of double effect. So the other thing they're doing is they're bringing retail forecast directly into the DOM and doing the kind of inventory allocation by customer and by channel that you were talking about, Joe.
Yeah, well, it occurred to me also, if I don't have a DOM, let's just say I was trying to manage a retail channel and an e-commerce channel and maybe even a marketplace channel, and I started kind of moving some of the retail over to the other channels, and I start doing that on a regular basis, what does it do to my forecasts? I mean, because now I think I sold all those to the retail. I mean, I'm sure there's somewhere way to catch it, but this is why I want my Dom to kind of manage that at a strategic level, so I don't have to later on figure it out through audits where my inventory doesn't match where my sales don't match my inventory.
Sure. And that starts with the original forecast and saying, okay, by channel, and this is very common, especially in new product introductions, where if it takes off, there's just never enough inventory to meet the initial demand. And so what channels are going to get, what channels within the company are going to get what allocation of that initial inventory or whatever. And then but the forecasts are always wrong, and so by definition almost. And so as things change, we've done some work with a company in the entertainment media business, DVDs and CDs, and if there's still CDs around, the games and whatever. And they release a new product, and they have some forecasts, but sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's a product that's a hit that they weren't expecting much out of. Sometimes there's something they thought would be a big hit as a dud. And so how do I recalibrate my my inventory levels and plan for that, and be able to perhaps open up a new channel or whatever to get rid of excess inventory. That's the kind of thing, again, a Dom can do.
I worked for a forecasting software company for a while. It was a short stint, but I remember the CEO brought me in when I first started. He said, "Joe, the very worst thing that can happen is you under forecast when you don't have enough goods." He goes, "The very worst thing that can happen, except getting too much inventory and not being able to sell it." I said,
well,
he says, I was like,
that's what keeps a lot of us employed in the supply chain, is solving that supply demand problem. It hasn't gone away yet, and
he said,
anytime soon.
So he says, it's our job to get it smack dab right. And he goes, and we never do it, but we're getting better every day. So let's talk a little about implementation. Well, I want to talk about implementation, but before we get to implementation, I'm going to give you my layman's terms about what we're talking about. So in the olden days, not so long ago, we had warehouse management systems that so I received goods, I put it on my shelves, and I know what my system tells me where it's all at. And you might have called that inventory management systems too, but I know when it goes in and out of my facility, and I know where it's stored. That was the simplest, right? And then I know when we talked last time, you talked about warehouse execution system. So give me just the quick definition of that before we get to the implementation.
Yeah, sure. That's obviously for a whole other topic. But warehouse execution, most people know WMS. Warehouse execution system is something that sits on top of in our case, our own WMS, or in other cases, third-party WMS. It just brings a level of orchestration and optimization to the fulfillment process that's just kind of designed differently than a WMS traditionally was, which is a little bit more reactive. DOM is more proactive and kind of monitoring the environment all the time. It's always on. That's when I first had that explained to me, is where I really started to get it there. And it's just going to do some things in terms of capacity management and optimizing the flow of goods, so you don't have peaks and valleys and things along that nature. Again, it's a topic for a whole other conversation, but it's a really exciting and a lot of interest out there.
But I think for a lot of us laymen, we just say WMS. But there's a WMS, then there's this warehouse execution system that sits kind of over top of that makes sure my fulfillment centers are running as effectively and efficiently as possible, so I can get that throughput that I need. And then this DOM is a whole nother level. And am I right to say it that way?
Sure. Although, yeah, I mean, in general, yes. I mean, I will say that we have a number of customers that are both DOM and WMS, and in some cases, they thought they needed WMS, and when we got in there, it turned out really their initial pain point, or the first thing to solve was the DOM layer. And so that kind of works. And one example of that, I just want to give this one quick user case study, because the two that we covered were kind of retail-ish centric, and I've been saying how it's B2B as well. So we have one customer that's a major appliance repair business, multi-billion-dollar company, and if anybody knows anything about the parts business, it's very common to have what's called a multi-echelon network, where I've got master DCs, regional DCs, and in this company's case, they've got about 5,500 or 6,000, something like that, technicians running around in vans that have their own inventory. And so you think about it, when when an order, and they're running both our DOM and our WMS. When an order comes in and we expect, or a repair order comes in and we expect these parts are needed, somebody has to make a decision as to where do I get this part from? Do I get it from the master warehouse? Do I get it from the regional DC? Do I get it from somebody that has the inventory in a van 30 miles away in Boston? And so again, it's a different problem, but in the end, it's the same problem. What's the best place to do this, given capacities and constraints? And in some cases, in this companies, they may have made service commitments that even though the cheapest place to ship it from is from this node, there's some kind of SLA or whatever that they have to keep a certain level of inventory, and so they can't tap into that. So they have to have to move past that, even though it would be the best place to ship it from. And so we do all that, and at the end of the day, when the technician is done, there may be parts that were taken off the machine. There may be parts that he thought he or she was going to need that they didn't need or whatever. And so we're actually doing the reverse logistics on that, and we're telling them, should I just keep it? Should I send it back to one of the regional or master distribution centers? Should I ship it to the guy or gal in Boston 30 miles away? Should I ship it to a repair center? And so we do all of that logic as well. And I just wanted to bring that up to show, and a lot of DOM companies aren't interested in these kind of B2B type problems. We do the retail stuff too, but we do a lot of very interesting stuff in B2B world as well.
And by the way, I did a podcast with Throughput, with Seth Page over there. And one of the things he talked about was, from there, a lot of research suggests that 30% of the stuff that we build goes obsolete on shelves or perishes on shelves. And I think that was very believable in the past, where we didn't have good control over our inventory. But we all know, if you go through a plant, there's always stuff, plant or warehouse, you'll see obsolete stuff. And those parts companies are a perfect example, because when you've got service parts, you never quite know how many you're going to need. So you build them, and then to your point, I'm going to wait 3 days to get it when the guy 20 miles from me might have it in his truck. I call my buddy up and say, Dan, give me that part.
Well, and let's look at like another kind of example of that, and going back to the retail world, but just because it's kind of on top of mind here. But, let's just say you've got seasonal merchandise in the northern parts of the country for summer, let's say, and now it's approaching fall, and you've got a couple of choices. You can deeply discount the inventory at the store and hope it sells, or I can ship to, return it. Usually it goes to ones going to TJ Maxx or, some channel like that, or whatever it happens to be. But with DOM, I can say, all right, I have this summer outfit. No one in Ohio where I'm at is going to order it in September or whatever. But you know what? Somebody in Miami might. And so now with and most of the companies that implement these kind of solutions finally get a revenue bump from being able to sell some of that inventory that was kind of orphaned. But now if there's other markets for it, I can just keep it at the store, keep it in the back room, be aware that it's there. And if an order comes in for, we make it available online in Miami, somebody places an order, we're going to ship it from Ohio rather than having to return it to TJ Maxx.
Yeah, I love that. So again, I think it's at some point there's as you said, a revenue bump, but I think also as we're being in the supply chain asked to do more about sustainability, this is a good way to do it. We're gonna make sure stuff doesn't get obsoleted because it got old in my facility when it could have sold 100 miles away. So let's talk about implementation. How do I implement a DOM? But first I got to call you.
Topic. I'll just say this, that I will say this just in general. We hear stories of implementations that just take too long, and we're not quite sure why that is. And I'm talking, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, or whatever. Ours are typically done in about 4 months, sometimes 3 months, sometimes 5 months, but depending on the complexity and what resources the customer has and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the things we firmly believe in is getting the integrations to, existing systems within the customer. If we need to integrate to, third-party warehouse companies and their WMS, if we need to integrate with vendors for vendor dropship, get that stuff done early, because you can't really test and configure and test the DOM solution in any meaningful way if you can't get that actual feedback in terms of what the other systems are, how they're reacting, whatever. So we start get the integrations done typically in a couple of months. And that provides you then the foundation for a project that hopefully then will get done in 3, 4, 5 months. And this just provides, a lot more value and allows you to, move forward with a project that's viewed as a successful endeavor. And then, of course, it's you got to train some super users and a surprisingly low number of people. You don't need IT people to support this application to configure the rules. In the one omnichannel retailer example I gave, I think they have 2 half-time people that look after this. Very low overhead requirements, and the inventory balancing that I talked about. Actually, they had 2 full-time people that were doing nothing but that manually. Those people are off now doing other work. And so DOM does not have to be hard. Like any enterprise application, there's some challenges, whatever, but DOM does not have to be that difficult, and you want to be looking for somebody that can deliver in a reasonable time frame and not 12 months.
Yeah, and I got to think, Dan, that the supply chain is going to have to, as much as we've kind of quickly grown up in the last decade in regards to e-commerce, the omni-channel is going to get more challenging, not easier. We're not going to see people taking away services. We're still going to have all this. And you touched on a little bit. We're seeing more B2B e-commerce. I used to use e-commerce and direct-to-consumer interchangeably, but now there's a lot of businesses that are saying we're going to sell to our customers via e-commerce.
Well, yeah, and I talked about the concept of sell anywhere, ship anywhere. We were talking with the European auto parts company. Project is still kind of in formulation, but that's their attitude, and they want to be able to across their entire network, worldwide, know what inventory they've got where, not only in their own facilities, but in the third-party facilities and even at their various dealers and retailers that they sell through. And being able to allocate that inventory as if it was their own when it's really a third party, third party actually owns it at this point. And so these are the kind of things that we're moving down. There's no question about that. And how you do that without a tool like DOM, effectively, I have no idea.
Yeah. So take us through some of the benefits of this. I know we've kind of talked about a few of them as we've gone through, but touch on some of them again.
And I kind of hit them with the case studies or whatever. So, I mean, it's the ability to, enable a lot of these processes with very limited to no modification of the existing systems that you have, being able to quickly and easily develop and adapt how you want the business to run, and your clock speed of doing that becomes just so much greater. I mean, when COVID popped up and we needed to support curbside picking, we had some customers up and running in just a matter of a couple of days, literally. It's kind of just a different form of buy online, pick up in store, frankly, but being able to react very quickly. The level of inventory visibility across an extended network is just not commonly in place today. DOM can allow you to do that. And again, it's all about keeping a customer happy, but how do we keep the customer happy at the least cost to the company? And this is, again, what DOM can do. And it can solve, very complex business problems for B2B companies, such as trying to bring multiple orders from multiple points together. We call this a order hub that sits on top of existing ERPs, no OMSs, and whatever. No one can ever get on a single instance or whatever. You can put a DOM on top of all these other systems. They have one interface, basically, in terms of routing those orders to the right underlying, MRP, order management system, ERP, whatever it happens to be. Those are just some of the highlights, but it's the flexibility that you have to execute what you want to do that really sets DOM apart.
Yeah. And Dan, I can't help but think that a lot of companies are trying, and I guarantee they're being unsuccessful, trying to do this without a DOM. And maybe not even recognizing that there's a tool out there that will make this happen. And they're doing it with emails and phone calls and a whole bunch of manual interventions that I guarantee can't measure up.
Yeah, and another take on that same theme, slightly different take, which is, we've seen a lot, like, everyone had to do curbside when, or you had to do it. There was no really choice in the matter. But what companies often did was, the fastest way to get it up and running so that they could say they had the capability and execute on it somewhat. But, do the quick and dirty, I'll call it, solution that was put in place, is it really flexible enough to keep up with the dynamic changes opening, closing stores, all those kind of opening, closing distribution centers, bringing on a new supplier, all those kind of things. Can it do that quickly and rapidly, and can it scale to meet the needs of the business? So we're in conversations with and have been with a number of companies that did it themselves, did it good enough to get by to begin with, but are looking for really a more commercial, scalable solution, more flexibility than they did trying to minimize the minimal effort to get it up and running in-house.
Yep. So we've talked about DOM in general, distributor order management. So what makes the Softeon DOM different and better?
Well, I think I've kind of hinted at some of them today here. Don't want to get too commercial, but we just have a very flexible system. We're very we get outstanding compliments with the flexibility of our rules engine every time we demo it to customers. So I think that's very strong. We've got the ability to do both B2B and B2C. A lot of the DOM vendors just aren't interested outside of the retail world. We not only are interested, we have a number of successes there in the third-party logistics market, where DOM is starting to gain some real momentum. And then we've got a number of very innovative or differentiating features. I'll just mention a couple real quick. One is a simulation capability. So if you want to change your rules around how inventory is managed or fulfillment decisions are made or whatever, how do you know if that's the right thing to do? Well, what we can actually do is to take actual orders, take the last 90 days of orders, just for example, and run them through a simulation engine where we've changed certain parameters about which stores, how many stores we want to do store fulfillment out of, or whatever that happens to be, inventory policies, new product introductions, and see the actual results of what this is how it would have changed what actually we did do, and the outcome that we had there in terms of service levels and inventory levels and all those kind of things. And usually you're going to find, okay, we need to make some additional tweaks. Run a simulation again. Okay, now we got it where we want it. And now we can promote that directly from the test environment into the production environment. And now you can have a great deal of confidence that the changes you made are going to result in these kind of benefits to you for making them. We don't think anybody else is doing that. And then second, we just have a kind of a dynamic dynamic rules around different variables, weighted variables. It's not just about cost. It's also about service. It's also about resources. It's also about all these things. And rather than having a hard fixed path in the rules, which is beneficial in itself, but more dynamically. So today I can say, all right, even though this order is cheapest to ship from here, this facility over here is way underutilized in terms of order flow. So to balance, and others are overflow, too much work, we're going to actually take, consider a number of factors. We're going to take some of that work and move it to a facility that's going to be underutilized today. And so it's a weighted set of attributes, that you can define, that it's not just a single answer. It's a blend based on a lot of different attributes. And that's where you can start to get into some AI type capabilities as well.
No, I love both those features. So the second one you just described. So there's two nodes and you say, hey, we put some rules in place, and I say, hey, cost. I can send it from this node 1, and it's going to be a little more costly, but it's going to get there a day earlier. And then I can send it from node 2, it'll be cheaper. But I don't want to just go just price, and I don't want to go just time. So if I say, hey, it's only 6 cents cheaper to get there a day earlier, right? Or I take it back, 6 cents more expensive, but it'll be there a day earlier. I want that, you use weighted, but it's got that dynamic rules, and that's the rules I need, because they need to be able to roll with me, right? They need to be dynamic. And the other one you described is the scenario planning. I think that is going to become I think you described the future. Is we're going to look at the last quarter and say, had we changed the rules slightly, what would have last quarter looked like? And we say we would have had this many more on time, or would have cost us this much on time, or it was going to make us more money. Whatever the scenario looks like, if I can start basically go back and do lessons learned in a digital scenario, I love that.
The things that work together, so you have the simulation capability or scenario planning, I'll call it, because we do run a simulation. But the benefit of that is also closely tied to the speed with which you can change the rules. Okay, so in other words, if I could run a simulation, but then it's going to take me weeks and months to configure the system to test whether those what the impact would have been, then the whole thing kind of falls apart, right? So you got to have the two things together, the simulation of the scenario planning with rapid configuration of rules changes so that I can go through this iterative cycle in a relatively short period of time and come up with the solution that's right for me today.
Right. So I've heard people use the term digital twin for that. I've also heard people call it the digital sandbox. But basically, I have a chance to learn and adjust in a digital environment that's not going to cost me money, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, it is a form. I mean, digital twin means a lot of different things, but it is a form of digital twin. I would agree with you. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's the future. We're all going to see that in the before too long, and we need it. We need it. Again, this is the dynamic nature of this. It's a Rubik's Cube squared. It's just very difficult. No human's going to be able to figure this out in their head, so we need a system. Anyway, Dan, I want to wrap this bad boy up, but I had a few more things I want to talk to you about. Is how do we learn more about Softeon?
So if you go to Softeon.com, Softeon, you'll find a lot of different resources. One thing I will really point you to is a couple 3 years ago, my colleague and I, Satish Kumar, co-authored a book called The Little Book of Distributed Order Management. And it's literally
if you give me a link, I'll put it in here.
Yeah, it's a physical hard copy, but you can also, of course, download a PDF version of it. It's about 70 pages that takes you through a lot of what we covered today, a little more detail, but it's easy read. You'll be done with it quickly, and we get a tremendous amount of downloads of that resource, and it's amazing the number of opportunities we walk into for Dom, and somebody either references they have the little book, I will say, hey, we have this little book. They say, we know, we read it 2 months ago or whatever. So that's just under the resources tab, I believe. It's not too hard to find. That's just, we have some other collateral brochures and white papers and things like that, but I'd just either download that electronic version or request a hard copy because we'll ship one to you. I think that's the place to start off. And because Dom is not understood. We talked about that today. So this is a great primer to help them understand what Dom is all about.
And if you give me a link, I'll put it in the show notes. And Dan, didn't you guys create some videos also about kind of warehousing? Do you have some videos on this that we could add? I know it's not about Dom necessarily, but just overall warehousing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. We have all kinds of different webinars of numerous kinds. So certainly, if you go out to the website and look under webinar and videos, there's a rich array of material about all the different areas we talked about today.
Yep. And back to your original comment, among the complex or the complicated or the complex use cases, you guys do very, very well in the Gartner study. And as you were saying. The complex. I keep thinking, whose isn't complex at this 1 minute? Who's got an easy? Who's got an easy one?
About it. Yeah, there are not many simple ones left. You got that right on.
So what I'll do, Dan, is I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to Softeon, so we can reach out and talk to you. And I really appreciate you taking us through this. And again, guys, if you're listening on this podcast, I know you hear distributed order management, you think, oh my God, that's above my pay grade. That sounds boring, but this is what makes it all work. This omni-channel that you hear so much about, if it's going to work right, it's going to require a DOM.
It was a great discussion, Joe. Appreciate you having me as always.
Yep. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward.
You've been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage in conversation with experts in the logistics field. For more details, visit thelogisticsoflogistics.com or follow Joe Lynch on LinkedIn.